You're listening to the OCD Stories podcast, hosted by me, Stuart Ralph. The OCD Stories is a podcast dedicated to raising awareness and understanding around obsessive-compulsive symptoms. I do this through interviewing inspired therapists, psychologists, and people who have experienced OCD. Welcome to the OCD Stories. And welcome to episode 442 of the podcast. And in this one, I am the guest. My good friend and colleague Jonny Say is interviewing me on this episode, where he's asking me questions about my work as a therapist with children and young people. And in particular, we talk about adapting exposure and response prevention therapy and acceptance and commitment therapy for children and teens with OCD, the other therapies I integrate, self-compassion, how parents can help their children with OCD, what I would tell my younger self, and much more. So I enjoyed chatting with Jonny. He's a good host. Hope you guys enjoy it too, and enjoy hearing a bit more about how I practice as a therapist. And thank you to NoCD for supporting the podcast. NoCD offers effective and convenient therapy available in the US and outside the US. To find out more about NoCD, their therapy plans, if they currently take your insurance, or to download their free app, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD stories, or the link will be in the episode description. Thank you to all of our patrons for supporting our work. To sign up to our Patreon and to check out the other benefits you'll receive as a patron, please see the link in the show notes. So thank you to you guys as always for listening. It means a lot. And of course, thank you to Jonny for his time interviewing me. I deeply appreciate it. And without further ado, here I am.
So, Stu, I think it'd be great to hear a little bit about where you are in your life and what's going on just now, and anything you want to say about your recovery work as well. I think the listeners would be very interested.
Yeah, thanks, Jonny. Thanks for hosting. Where am I at? With you, obviously, as people would have heard, have we? No, actually, in about a week, we would have hit our year anniversary of our first clinical hour we delivered as a centre, the Integrative Centre for OCD Therapy, which is obviously an awesome achievement. It's great, still going a year on, and it's growing. We've got a few more associates now, including children and young person therapists. Therapist associates are what we call our therapists, and I manage the children and young person team. So it's awesome to expand that, because it's been small, and that's been quite a high demand area, and we just haven't been able to offer enough therapists to people, which has been tough, but we're addressing that now. And yeah, it's just been great to see this clinic grow and flourish. And I'm trying to think, anything else worth noting on the centre?
Well, I was thinking there that we've got some availability online for children and young people there, haven't we, as well? Whereas before it was all in person, which obviously is often better for younger kids. But yeah,
that's a good point. Yeah, because also there's myself, Deb's locally to me, Emma's kind of hybrid. But yeah, myself and Deb's preference is in person, because we work a lot with young kids as well. And but yeah, we've taken on more therapists to work with that sort of teenage 11 sort of plus. And yeah, so that hopefully we start to see a lot more in that age and meet that demand. There's definitely a need there. But yeah, so that's that kind of business side of things. And there's more developments coming with the centre that we'll release in due course. And yeah, me personally as a therapist, I'm still just growing and learning, trying to better myself where I can, when I have 5 minutes to read something or learn something. But compassion focused therapy is an area I just got that book, Jonny, you recommended.
Oh yeah, the big one
for the post today. Yeah, massive. Yeah, cost me an arm and a leg, so I'm gonna start getting through that. And just sound play is something I'm finishing my diploma in, and I'm still heavily in that, learning that, how it can be used with all my clients, OCD and non-OCD clients, and just enjoying having fun playing with that, because it's a very different therapy to ERP and ACT. We'll talk about it more later, but I want to caveat, I'm not using that as a sole intervention by any means, but as an additional therapy for some people.
A tool there.
Yeah,
Yeah, that's
exactly.
great.
So
Yeah.
other than that, enjoying England in the Euros. I say enjoying it. It's unbelievably painful watching them this tournament, except for the last
Yeah.
game. So yeah,
So you'll be using your acceptance skills tomorrow to handle the stress, or not tomorrow, but when they play
will be
to
today when
handle
this
the
goes out.
stress. Okay, yeah. So today. So we were wanting to focus this around I mean, you obviously have a lot of expertise yourself in OCD therapy for adults, but obviously your specialism is children and young people. And we wanted to take an opportunity to pick your brains about what you're learning, developing, seeing as helpful for people, put some of your expertise and wisdom out there about this topic, OCD in children and young people. Um, and I guess the first thing I was interested in was if you could tell us a bit about the adaptations you make to ERP for children and young people.
Yeah, for ERP.
ERP to start with, and then I would be interested with ACT as well. But I think
Okay.
ERP, and you could go on to do ACT as well.
Yeah, so I made a few notes before this because I wanted to. My recall in the moment is terrible, so
You and me both.
yeah, I like to think ahead of time for stuff like this. Yeah,
Yeah,
so the point's kind of that really there's a lot, and there's not a lot, if that makes sense.
hmm
There's a lot, but equally, it's not too far off from what you would be doing with adults. I don't
yeah,
think. Obviously, there's certain factors you want to bring in if there's a sort of an ASD diagnosis, autism diagnosis, or ADHD. There might be a few different tweaks, and I'll try and remember that as I talk, but I probably will also forget it. So this is just generally speaking, without getting too specific. Definitely psychoeducation. You've got to adapt the wording. And with autism, I try and bring in more hobbies, interests, special interests. But equally with young kids, I'm going to do that too, because
yeah,
otherwise it's all psychological, scientific, it's boring.
yeah,
So you got to try and make it fun. And you can tell when their eyes glaze over, it's not because they're
yeah.
ruminating, it's because you're boring them, at least in young kids.
Yeah,
Well, I'm boring them. That's what I found. I'm joking. They could be ruminating too. But I try and use simple examples. So I'll use phobias to explain it, not OCD, because I think phobias are way easier to understand than an
yeah.
OCD example. Or maybe it's just easier for me to explain it that way. But I'll
Mhm.
use spider phobias. Most people have some level of fear of spiders. If not, they understand others have that fear.
Yeah,
And it's the whole, well, if you talking about the upstairs downstairs brain, and I'll draw this out, or talking about how the brain learns, like
yeah,
inhibitory learning theory. If a spider comes in now and we suddenly throw our feet up and scream and look away from it and try and find an exit point, we're teaching our downstairs brain spiders are bad through our behavior. And that's not to say that's how we develop OCD. I'm just using that as an example how brains learn. And
yeah,
then how we decondition that or relearn something new is right. Well, if the spider comes in, we're in the UK. We know statistically it's very unlikely that's going to be a dangerous spider. Um, so our fear, in theory, would be irrational most of the time. Obviously, I'm sure there's the odd tarantula or black widow that gets loose from people's collections in the UK, but it's not statistically likely. Um,
yeah,
and so as it walks in, it looks like a regular house spider. If we keep our feet on the ground, yeah, our heart's going to race. We're going to get a bit anxious. But if we continue talking, interacting, doing whatever we're doing, um, we're not avoiding the spider. Equally, we're not staring at it to check where it is. We're keeping our feet on the ground, even though our brain wants to rip them off the ground. Over time, as long as that spider doesn't attack us, I might not use the word attack depending on age, our brain's going to learn something, which is that at least that
yeah,
spider was okay. And
yeah.
then next time that spider or another spider looks like it comes in, we probably will be maybe a tiny bit less anxious potentially. Or we might be
Mm,
as anxious, but less afraid.
mm,
So I use things like that to kind of simply show how the brain learns. And what we're trying to do in OCD then is pull back on some of your compulsions, reduce them so the brain can start to learn through your
Yeah.
behavior change that is okay, most
Yeah.
likely,
Yeah.
or you can cope with it. Um,
Yeah.
so I like the sort of
Yeah.
spider. I use tigers a lot when talking about the upstairs downstairs brain. There's a tiger
Yeah.
that comes in your room, blah 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 blah. You want your amygdala to fire and freak out. But the
Yeah.
problem is your amygdala's firing and worrying a lot, and there's no tiger. But yet, the downstairs
Mm.
brain can't really, it doesn't know there's no tiger.
Mm.
Um, we have to show it there's no tiger. Um,
Yeah.
and I'm not saying disprove the worry, I'm just merely saying that's ultimately where it will get to.
Change our relationship to the
Yeah,
tiger and learn through
exactly.
that. Yeah, yeah. And
Um,
that kind of learning, I mean, it's relevant to adults, right? Actors said for a long time that metaphors and visual learning will stick with us for 10 years and more. So yeah, I like that. That makes a lot of sense. I was thinking as you were talking, we've talked before about the clients where they can keep their life so contained. With adults, they might have hit the pain of OCD so many times that they're starting to realize my life's slipping away from me and I'm not achieving and doing the things I want to do. And the motivation can be higher there for ERP. And we've talked about it before when teenagers or young people, they can keep their life contained in a bedroom.
mhm.
They can have all their social connection online,
Rent's
all their
paid.
hobbies on. Yeah, yeah. It's there's sort of so how do are there adaptations you make to ERP or the motivation side to work around that?
Yeah, it's I find that that's a tough one for teens, especially because their
Yeah.
brain is changing and developing at such a rate in those teenage years, which is why there's that whole forgetting the saying now. But people, parents, anyone that parents listening, or just people who were teens may have heard their parents say it, or that yeah, teens are just. I'm trying to find a nicer way of saying it. They become nightmares. Is the
Mm.
easiest way of
Yeah.
saying it because their
Yeah.
brains. It's not their fault. Their brains are just changing. We all went through it, teens. We all did risky
Yeah.
things. I say all, generally speaking. We all made impulsive choices and all of this, and that's just the brain changing at that time.
It's the
And that
rapid development and the rapid shift in hormones
exactly.
and
And the
yeah.
the seek for independence at that age, separating from the parents, it's a natural part of, becoming a young adult. Um, but then that can cause problems between child and or teen and parent, right? There's ruptures in
Yeah.
the relationship sometimes, not always, obviously. All brains adapt differently. Um,
Yeah.
so it's hard to, you can reward them. Obviously, the rewards they want are often more expensive. They want it now. They don't want to wait a month of doing ERP homework to get it. So
Yeah.
you almost have to make it smaller, but that they get it now. It could be a very small amount of money that they know is going to build up each day. Or uh, obviously, it's finding what works for your child because it's going to be different, and it doesn't have to be money. With younger kids, however, using rewards can be quite effective. I think more so at times.
Mm. Mm.
You can even use stickers for some young kids. That's happy enough. I'll do that in session. I'll create like a sticker
Mm.
chart as they do their homework or we do exposures in session. They get to pick a sticker for each one of those exposures, and that's
Yeah.
rewarding enough for them. And that's what you can get a pack of stickers. I mean, where I live, like 2 packs of stickers for £1. That's, if you
Mm.
imagine each one of those is an exposure, there's maybe 30 stickers in a pack, 60 exposures. That's a ton of
Yeah.
exposures for £1 of rewards.
Right.
So
Yeah.
yeah, and so it
Might
could
try
save
that on some of
time.
my adults.
Yeah, yeah, it might work. You yeah, but it could be like time with mum and dad. One of my kids wanted time with their sister, so the
Right.
mum had to speak with the older sister. If your brother does this, can you just spend time with him playing this game or whatever it is? Because obviously
Oh,
the older
yeah.
sister might not want to do that because she wants to be out with her
Mm.
friends or whatever.
Yeah. Yeah.
So there's a million and one rewards. You can get creative with it. Again, it doesn't have to cost anything. But
Yeah.
motivation is hard from a teen point of view. I think you can't say, or when a 25-year-old you, which I have done, if this doesn't change, can we envisage what 25-year-old you might be like? She might be housebound. She might da 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 da. I haven't done this often, but it was, I think, relevant with this one client. And they're like, yeah, I get that, and I don't want that to happen, obviously. Okay, so we'll do the exposure now. No, I'm like, but you see
Mm,
the logic of where we're going to be
yeah.
when yeah. So there's no. And it's like, as an adult, you're
Yeah.
like, why don't you get the logic? They do, but equally they're discounting it because that's the teen brain. They're thinking about the here and now.
Yeah.
That's too far.
Yeah.
So it's trying to make adaptations closer to where they are in the continuum of time.
Finding the cost, I guess, around them rather than that long-term cost. What does it
Yeah,
cost
what
them
do they want to
now?
do now?
And
Do they want a boyfriend, girlfriend? Do they want spend more time with their friends? Do they want to learn a skill, a hobby? And look, in saying that, some teens come in and they're ready to go and they're like,
yeah.
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 And others, it's this, I think what you said earlier about they can live in their bubble.
Yeah.
If there's no leverage there and everything is taken care of, OCD kind of takes over. And it's that whole saying of better the devil you know.
Yeah.
OCD at
Yeah.
that point is comfortable, it's cushy. Why change? Change is too scary. Whereas
Yeah.
adults don't often have that. If I don't sort this
Mm,
out, I'm going to lose my job. If I don't sort this out, I'm going to
mm,
lose my partner, lose my child, lose. There's leverage, and I'll do
mm.
anything now to get better. Teens typically don't have that. I've even
Yeah.
seen it where they've been high up in athletics or sport, and there was the thing that they could lose that, and it's like that's not an incentive, even though they love that sport. Which for an
Mm,
adult, they'd be like, I can't lose this. So
mm, mm.
there will be therapists listening that will be screaming and have better answers than me on this. Absolutely. It's an area of weakness for
Mm.
me that I'm still really trying to develop. Young kids, it's much easier to get the motivation. They'll typically do what you suggest. You create the hierarchy with them. You give them the explanation. Oh, yeah, it makes sense. Let's do it.
Yeah.
Teens get that more rebellious, don't want to listen,
Mm.
and that's okay. And for me, it just takes a little bit longer with teens.
Yeah.
Um, but you can get them there.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
It's just
You
not
got to
straight
work with that
adulthood.
resistance and
Yeah.
then little by little challenge it and build it up
Yeah,
maybe more gradually and things. Yeah.
exactly. And
Mm.
we'll come on to ACT in a bit, but I think that's maybe where ACT comes in for the teens, especially. With
Mm,
some of the
mm,
young
mm,
kids, I do ACT, but I don't think it's as needed as it is with teens. Um,
mm, mm,
so so yeah, I'm sure there's a lot better answer out there to all of that, but that's where I'm at. For honesty. So in terms of, I do lots of whiteboard drawings, whether that's in person, which I mainly am, but if I'm online on Zoom, I'll use the Zoom whiteboard drawing out. I
yeah.
do draw out a couple graphs which show what happens to OCD over time. I draw the brain out. If I'm doing metaphor, okay, we're going on to ACT. I'll just quickly say this. If we're doing metaphors, like today, I did passengers on the bus. So I draw out a
Yeah.
bus and then draw out the
Okay. Yeah.
person, their values they're moving towards and what matters to them, the uncomfortable thoughts and feelings that are shouting at them that they don't need to listen to. So I will
Mm,
use whiteboards for that stuff.
yeah.
Values exposures, especially with teens, figuring out what matters to them, and then really targeting exposures that way, because I find when they're not linked to values, it becomes harder to do traditional type exposures because why am I doing
Yeah.
this? That's the
Yeah.
teens are very honest when they think something's stupid.
Yeah.
And I get told that quite a bit. And it's given my self-esteem working with kids and teens. Um,
Good for
but
your resilience, it
I
sounds
don't know.
like.
No, I like it. I like the honesty. I think it's
Mm,
refreshing because sometimes we live
yeah.
in a world where people just aren't honest day to day, and teens and
Mm,
people with autism as well can be incredibly honest, and I love that.
mm, mm,
Um, so gamifying ERP, especially for young
mhm.
kids. So,
Yeah.
many people would have heard the exposures of like if you can't even say a word, like trying to say it or write it down, or so we might say those words if they're having trouble saying them, write them on bits of paper. We might then read them out loud, say them in funny voices, accents. So again, that's integrating a bit more act type stuff, diffusion.
Yeah.
But then we scrunch it up and we throw it in a bin, like as if we're playing basketball. So it's making it a
Yeah.
fun game. So
Yeah.
anywhere we can gamify. And a lot of the games I just come up with on the spot.
Nice.
Thinking
Yeah.
about, not always, sometimes I draw a blank, but sometimes you know what people like and you can tweak things. And that might
Mm,
come from a bit of my play therapy training. Um, and then I try to engage them in when they're doing exposures, engage them in their life. And this is the act part, I don't just want them to sit there and tolerate it. Um, Tell me about college. You mentioned that thing at school. How did that go? How was your play the other week? I am
mm,
distracting them, but distracting them in service of living their life in what matters to
yeah.
them.
Yeah.
And then we drop anchor again, act, but then we check in. How are you? And where's your SUDS? I do SUDS. I also do present moment awareness, willingness scale. And then right, let's just jump back in, re-trigger you, and then do the same thing. Might do this a few times, as opposed
Yeah.
to triggering them once and holding out for 40 minutes
Yeah.
without doing compulsions. So we're
Going
still
back
not
and
doing
forth.
compulsions, and we're not ruminating by adding in
Yeah,
something
yeah,
emotional.
and you said it's like distraction. It's like that idea of, you can do skillful functional distraction or you can do avoidance,
Mm,
control agenda
yeah.
distraction. Really, it's closer to life as well, because I always have that issue that if you're just in a very um, sort of an exposure that doesn't mirror life at all, then how are you going to generalize those skills
Yeah.
into life where you are triggered while you're talking to someone?
Mm,
So the ability to have a conversation with you and to let the intrusive thoughts be there and accept the anxiety and stay engaged, that's a skill for life. That's what they need.
yeah.
So it's a lot closer to using the
Yeah.
skills in life. So I
100%.
like that.
No, 100% agree. Yeah. Yeah. Because you're not like you're having a conversation in life. Oh, hang on a minute, I'm
Yeah. Let
triggered.
me
I
just
just need to,
stop you there.
yeah, just
Yeah.
pause for
Yeah.
40 minutes while
Yeah.
I habituate or learn something new. You're, you're trying to continue to talk and yeah, so that's what you do anyway. But now we're doing it in session as opposed to
Yeah.
something different in session. And that's not to discredit the habituation model. Like if that works for therapists. That's awesome. Keep doing it.
Yeah. And you can bring them all together and you
Yeah.
can
Oh,
use a bit of one
100%.
here and a bit of one
Yeah. There's no
there.
right
And
or wrong. It's always integration.
yeah.
Not always. Might be a lot. Um, yeah. Should I skip on to act?
Yeah. That'd be great.
Yeah. Um, I think ACT is something I'm still playing with for children and young people in terms
Hmm.
of like how I adapt it, because I still do it very much like I would with an adult. I just adapt a lot of the wording,
Yeah.
um, and with the metaphors, I maybe link them more to their interests,
Yeah.
and pop culture type stuff. Like the jerk at the party metaphor is very relevant to teens. A lot of them go to parties and they'll have been or are about to. So, and
Yeah.
there's always someone they don't like in their school. So,
Yeah.
they can kind of relate to that, I think. Um,
Yeah.
there is a good book on ACT for children, so young children by Tamar Black. I do like some of it in there, but that's not necessarily, and I use some of her principles, but it's not necessarily how I use ACT with children. But it is a good book.
Mm.
I do like she adapted the hexaflex in ACT. What it the
Yeah.
kidflex or
Oh,
something.
okay. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
obviously, like instead of values, it's what matters to
Yeah.
you. Instead of
Yeah.
committed action, it's do what matters. I think I'm
Yeah.
getting that right. So it's those sort of
Yeah.
adaptation. I really like those wordings. I think even for adult ACT therapists,
Yeah.
that's a better version.
Yeah.
What's
Yeah. A lot
self
of
is
people do
context,
that. Yeah. Yeah.
Um, so so there's that. I do like that. For like the mindful part of ACT, um, depending on age, for young kids, I do things like hot chocolate breathing, which is like you breathe in through your nose, you smell the hot chocolate, and then you cool the hot chocolate down with your mouth, breathe out through your mouth. So it's that
Do
kind
they
of
have a
you.
hot chocolate or is it
No, you
that's
pretend. So
magic?
you hold your
Yeah.
hands as
Pretend.
if you're, and
Yeah.
it's they that way they go slower and they're savoring it more.
Yeah.
And I might do shark breath where you take an in breath and then you run your hand down your face and your nose, breathing out slowly,
Oh,
like it's a
nice.
shark
Yeah.
fin.
Yeah.
Um, and then within dropping anchor, I'll obviously when we're doing the senses, I go for it much more like I won't say just notice what you can see, what you can hear, what you can touch. I'll be much more, okay, tell me three things you can see and what you notice. Don't just tell me chair, door, tree. Okay, what
Yeah,
about the door? Okay, well, it's got a silver handle. Okay, what about the chair? Okay, it's green and it's suede and whatever.
yeah.
So they're using that
So
up to their
observe and
brain more.
describe, and yeah.
Exactly. And
Mm,
then, okay, give me a couple things or a few things you can touch. What do they feel like? So I'm really breaking it down
mm,
slowly because I think otherwise with kids, and I think adults too, they just get distracted, as I do. If I don't notice the detail,
yeah,
using my senses doesn't work for me. I have to slow it right down. So I'll
yeah,
be much more like that. Emma's really good at this in that she gets really playful in dropping anchor of like, notice what your bum feels like on the seat and give it a wiggle,
yeah,
or like she gets them really moving
yeah.
in the moving the body part. Um,
Right.
so you adapt it in that, and like with the acknowledging your thoughts and feelings, the first step of dropping anchor or noticing, naming, I often just refer to it as noticing and naming. I might break
Yeah.
that down and say, right, for the next minute, and I might write it down on the whiteboard like worry, thought, story, memory,
Nice.
all those.
Yeah.
And for the next minute, all I want you to do is every time you have a thought, I just want you to use one of these words to label it. And we might go through that a
Mm,
few times. And then I write a prompt like, I notice a thought about, or I'm having a worry about, and then I get them for a minute to do that and use that
yeah.
longer sentence version to practice that notice and naming. I
Right.
think with younger kids especially, and then teens, you've got to go through that stuff a lot, and dropping anchor. They don't buy it as easily,
Uh,
and teens especially. So many times I've been told that dropping anchor is useless, or I'm stupid, or like,
yeah.
um,
Yeah.
I'm like, okay, fair enough. I hear you, but how many times you tried it this week? Well, I did it once and it didn't work. Okay.
Yeah.
So, why didn't it work? Well, I wasn't calm at the end of it. Well, that's not the point of what we're doing here. We're trying to get
Yeah.
some
Yeah.
distance and then live your life. So you have to kind of repeat that much more and, get eye rolled at quite a lot. Um,
Yeah.
but they do get it eventually, and when they get it, it works most of the time,
Mm,
you know.
yeah. Yeah.
So it's just having a bit more persistence, and I'm sure there's adults like that.
I was going to
Um,
say, I mean, a lot of
yeah,
what you're saying, I think, is, they're definitely very relevant to adults and certain adults, and even to the point of, yeah, people often struggle if they are trying to do notice and name and label stuff. They start getting all caught up on what the right label is. So I like the idea of having it written up on a board together, and then they can use that quite easily. We do a lot of writing down thoughts, but there's something nice about actually up on a board and um, yeah, yeah,
yeah, writing down's a good one. I don't really do that enough.
yeah,
Um, so I'm just looking at my notes to make sure I don't forget anything. I do like the whole thoughts as hand exercise quite a lot, and I might
yeah.
repeat that several times over many episodes. It's my podcasting hat on my sessions. Um,
Mm,
to really the thoughts as hands, so anyone's listening, it's just a visual exercise you can do, experiential exercise to help see when you're getting fused with a thought and how that blurs your kind of vision, and then how you kind of pull your hand away and the thoughts and worries are still there, but you're not hooked on them. And I
mm,
use hooked and unhooked a lot for
yeah,
being fused and defused. Um,
yeah,
yeah. Oh, and something I do with kids and teens is try and ask them to teach someone. Teach a family
mm,
member.
that's cool.
Um,
Mm,
yeah, or at the dinner table, because of course, dropping anchor is a skill that could be used for many people with many
yeah,
stuff issues going on, and I don't know where I heard this, but it's stuck in my head from many many years ago. Of if you want to learn something, teach it.
yeah,
So that's why I kind of ask them to do that. They don't always do it, obviously, and that's okay. But if they do, great.
mm,
And it also, I think, gives them a sense of pride in their
yeah,
home. Maybe where OCD's been kicking their butt, they can feel like they're, what's the word, in control in a good way, and more empowered.
mm,
And
yeah.
I've
I
got a
like
good,
that.
another use in this family that I can teach
Mm,
this and help people and build that sort of
mm,
confidence back up. But yeah, those, and then the only other thing actually to say on these two ERP and ACT is, you know, I will have the parents, usually just one of the parents in session a lot. If the kid really wants them in there, obviously sometimes I have to think about attachment. Is there something we need to do here around that? Or actually, is there an exposure here of, right, we need to get mum out of the room now for 30 minutes or 10 minutes, 5 minutes, and just be you and me, and let's ride that out. But generally, there's, as we know of OCD, there's, which we'll come to later, but there's a lot the parents do because they love their kids, but it kind of feeds into the OCD and anxiety.
Yeah.
And if mum or dad's in the room, then I can work with them also, helping them pull back on accommodations. So I
Yeah.
think that can be quite effective. And equally, if mum and dad are not in the room, then I get them on the phone occasionally to with the kids' permission to help pull back certain things. And I might email
Do you
them
get
homework.
scenario right, yeah. Do you get scenarios where you've got them to teach their family something like dropping anchor, and then they're kind of all doing it together, either at home when they're triggered and they're trying to urge surf a compulsion or something, they're doing it together, or all three of you in the room together, or
Yeah, I do definitely in the room. I'll get the parent to do it as well. And I kind of make a
mm.
joke of it. Like, if you're going to be in the room, I'm going to use you, not in like a, you know, in like a, like, I'm going to give you homework. I'm going to
Yes,
do
yeah.
whatever. You can't escape. If you want to be in here, or your kid wants you to be
You
in here,
can't
you're going
escape.
to be used as
Yeah,
part of the therapy.
yeah,
Um,
too right.
and
Yeah.
usually they don't mind that. So yeah, we drop anchor together, and then you'll often find that parent does remind the kid or teen. Like, teens may not want to hear it as much, but kids,
Yeah, I can imagine
especially,
that.
yeah, will be like, then the parent can help them through dropping anchor, which I think is
Mm,
really really useful, because otherwise they're probably going to be so overwhelmed that they're just going to forget it. I don't blame
yeah,
them. So I'm sure there's a lot more I can say, but those are like the obvious things that come to my mind.
yeah, they're great. Yeah, I guess I was interested in the other tools you bring in alongside this. I know you talked about sound play at the beginning and play therapy. Yeah, be interested to hear about the other integrative models you're bringing in
Yeah.
or
So,
tools.
yeah. So, obviously, I try and be evidence based, but at times I integrate arguably non evidence based therapies for OCD that I feel add something, which I'm sure all therapists do. There's probably hardly a therapist out there who is truly evidence based 100% of the time. I mean, as
Yeah.
soon as you adapt ERP slightly, you're no longer evidence based because you're not in
Mm.
alignment with the protocol that was used in a randomized control trial, you
Yeah,
know? So,
yeah, definitely.
if we're being pedantic about it. So, with teens, they've got so much going on in their lives, not just OCD. There's peer troubles, identity issues. And I don't even mean like sort of trans identity issues. Of course, that comes up in the room too sometimes, and we work on that. But just generally being a teen is hard, and they don't know who they are often. They're in that stage where they're trying to figure out what their identity is and what matters to them, and sometimes we have to work on that and help them through that. So sort of humanistic counselling or person-centered counselling is something I will use there, which can be quite
Mm,
useful. Not evidence-based for OCD, obviously.
mm.
I think I'm the only person with a piece of evidence on this in the whole world, just throwing that out there, at least English speaking countries. And it proved that humanistic counseling, at least
Yeah,
brief humanistic counseling, didn't work for one young person with
yeah.
OCD. But not to say,
But it's a foundation. I mean, there's
oh,
a lot of
100%.
textbooks. If you read, I remember when I was working in the NHS, some of the textbooks there even had a section on those foundational humanistic skills as part of ERP and obviously
Mhm.
ACT. I mean, Stephen Hayes and people are big fans of the
Yeah.
humanistic approaches as a foundation. So
Oh,
yeah, I mean,
100%. I've always
of
said
course
that.
you
It's
got
like
it.
the
It's got to be
foundation of what
there.
I do, those core
The amount of
conditions.
times I hear like a therapist has been patronizing to me when I'm working with someone and they'll say, my last
Mm.
therapist was patronizing. I mean, it's the
Mm.
antidote to that, right? To be
Yeah.
humanistic.
Oh, 100%. Like, I want to be effective with all my clients, obviously. Sometimes I'm not. And
Mhm.
I signpost them on, or maybe they move on. Generally, I try and be effective and get as high a rate as I can of helpfulness. But even if I'm not effective, what I want all my clients to be able to say is he cared and he listened, you know? And yeah, we hear it time and again where therapists haven't done that. I think
Mm.
it's not common. I still think most therapists do listen and care, but you'll be surprised. And
They don't
I
always
think they
communicate it, right? They don't always
no, they might
communicate
feel
that.
it, yeah, yeah, but they're
Mm.
forgetting these core basic humanistic principles that matter to people.
Mm.
And Anxiety Josh does a good job in his book, which, oh, how does that make you feel? That's what it's called,
Yeah,
where he links very much CBT with humanistic counseling in his case
yeah,
studies. A really good example. Um,
yeah. I like it when he
yeah,
talks about what's been introjected as well, like what have people brought, like what messages have they learned from their history, and that humanistic idea. It's so useful
100%.
as well.
Yeah, 100%. So compassion focused therapy, I use quite a bit with OCD, especially if there's body issue stuff there, self-esteem, or there's been bullying, the inner critic strong. I might use compassion focused chair work to kind of talk to the different parts. Along that line, kind of part of my training was in play therapy. So I'll bring in some of that and get creative, like Play-Doh.
Mm.
So I use a knockoff brand of Play-Doh because Play-Doh is just so expensive. Uh, anyway, I call it Play-Doh, and which is good branding by them.
So like Play-Doh or something that you're
Play-Doh.
using, or
No, it's not. I can't even what it's called. It's that bad. It's good stuff. Anyway, um, like I remember with one kid under 10 not too long ago, I decided to ask them using Play-Doh to basically make their OCD. Personify it, which is a lot of what a lot of OCD therapists do with young kids. I don't actually do that often, but I decided to with this kid for whatever reason, and he did that. And then I said, "Oh, that part of you we've been talking about that's really like compassionate and kind and cares for you and supports you. Could you maybe do that?" And he created that part. And I said, "What about that part that is really critical and is really mean and all of this?" So he did that. And then I was getting him to use these different Play-Doh objects to talk to each other, and seeing him only at, under 10 use this like compassionate Play-Doh figure to talk compassionately. No, sorry, it wasn't his inner critic. I did OCD himself and the compassionate part. To, and that's
Mm.
compassionate part was supporting himself, talking back to the OCD, but also supporting himself. And it was really nice to see that kind of
Yeah, yeah.
that happen. And then, as I said earlier, sand play. Sand play sounds playful, but it's actually used with adults too.
Hmm.
It was what's her name? Medora Koff, who was a Jungian analyst, adapted it for kids to create basically Jungian psychoanalysis within sand or using sand. But who is
Yeah.
it? Margaret Lowenfeld, who was British, I think. She created the weld technique, which was basically kids putting stuff in
Mm.
sand and creating mini
Yeah.
welds. And then Dorokoff made it Jungian. But there's also sand tray therapy, which is different, very similar but different. Sand play is unique in that it's much more symbolic. So it's very Jungian
Mm.
in archetypes and symbolism. And if someone puts a crucifix in a tray, well, what does that mean? It might mean
Mm.
something's being quite literally crucified, something's being sacrificed. It might be love, what Jesus
Mm.
stands for. It might be resurrection. It could be all these different things.
Mm.
Um, why have they used that house and not that house? If that's a really old ruin house, what does that say? Something crumbling, maybe something's dying, breaking down, or there's flowers
Mm.
on it. Maybe there's growth coming. So you can get really, really bogged down in the analysis. But I use it more with probably my non-OCD clients, but what I've started to experiment with is do like ERP trays. So I'll say,
Mm.
you're afraid your issue is around death. Okay, well, let's create a tray around that. Just go up to the symbols. Don't think, just whatever jumps out of you. If it doesn't make sense, the better. Like that's
Mm.
good because that's your unconscious speaking for those
Mm.
triggered many therapists out there. But um and and often these trays don't make sense, but when you start talking about it,
obviously we could say, well, we're reading into it and all of this. Fair enough. I get that. And I'm not
Hmm.
against that objection. Um, but all I care about is, does it resonate for the person? Is it shifting something? Is it moving them in some way? That's all that matters. Whether we're reading into it or not, they're seeing what they need to see to move something
Mm,
forward.
mm,
So that can be a nice early exposure on the hierarchy is, well, let's put it in the sand. It's a safer, contained way of doing it. I do parts trays. So can you put OCD in the tray, and can you also put objects that build you up and support you? And then I might be like, right, okay, so you've got that one that's your compassionate self. Can we get that to talk to the OCD, which might be a massive dragon or something? And then we have
mm.
dialogues that way. Again,
Yeah.
it's just using the sand.
And it's also a diffusion, isn't it? Because you're
Yeah,
getting this space and distance from
100%.
it. So you can bring in those other ideas, ERP, compassion, diffusion, other things into it.
Yeah, very much so. It's sensory. The young kids, teens,
Mm,
it can take them out of their head, which is grounding. It's also great for, like, I remember doing a tray not too long ago on real event.
mm,
So didn't want to discuss the real event memory. Obviously, it's been blocking the OCD a lot. And I said, right, well, let's
yeah,
put it in the sand. If you want, let's create a tray on this memory. That way, you're telling me the memory through symbolism and not directly, so it feels safer. But you're also
yeah,
exposing yourself a bit, which makes yourself vulnerable, which is an exposure.
yeah.
Also did one recently on a memory similar to real event memory, but it wasn't real event OCD. It was just a memory that was triggering into body image stuff. And we put that in the
Mm,
sand. And that allowed the person to eventually talk about the memory where they couldn't at first. So I see a
yeah.
lot of practical uses for sand play beyond the more unconscious or collective unconscious view
Mm,
of maybe how
mm,
it's used. Um,
mm.
so I really like it. I'm enjoying playing with it. It's not something I do every day. I bring it in for the odd client here and there,
Yeah, yeah,
but it can be really useful. And for non-ICD
yeah.
clients, I've seen some big shifts happen.
That's
Because we
cool.
don't always know what's going on, and when we put it in the sand,
Mm.
it can bring it to life for us visually.
Yeah, I was trying to remember the guy's name that wrote The Master and his emissary. I've forgotten his name now, but he talks about, yeah, the right brain, left brain fell out of fashion, but then he reworked it in a more sort of um, nuanced way. And I guess one of the big messages from that is that we are very symbolic and we are much more creative than we often realize. And these tools can be ways to tap into that actually and knock out the analytical brain that might be interrupting, so you can see how, whatever you think about unconscious and collective unconscious, there's also a route into just symbolic learning and getting out of our analysis paralysis and into our values actually symbolically and I can see a lot of use for it. And yeah, again, for kids, making it playful and engaging and not just some really aversive, either boring process or aversive. And I don't quite know why I'm doing it. And it's really aversive. Like you can see it as a bridge, definitely.
Yeah, 100%. You've got to with play therapy and stuff with the young kids. I think it helps to have it. I don't want to say you've got to. I think it helps to integrate that stuff because
Mm,
CBT can otherwise be a bit boring at times, and for young kids at least. And I think you can cleverly integrate play and CBT. So you're almost Trojan horsing in the principles of ERP and ACT through play.
yeah, yeah, yeah. Yeah, and you talked a bit about self-compassion, and I guess I'm interested in sort of anything for children and young people with self-compassion, and also maybe from there into barriers more generally for children and young people, but particularly that self-compassion part of it. What's that like trying to get kids to be more self-compassionate and sort of barriers more generally?
Yeah, I think with young kids, I go much more down we're being kind to ourselves
Hmm.
because I think self-compassion, obviously a lot of them understand it. That kids nowadays are so intelligent. It makes me
Hmm.
feel like an absolute idiot for what I was like at their age. But I think that's also a product of the internet. They just
Yeah,
have more
yeah,
information than we ever had.
yeah.
So they obviously would have heard of compassion most likely. Not all of them, but many of them have. But even though they've heard of it, doesn't mean it's sunk in yet. I think it's quite a big, grand concept. So kindness makes sense to them. And with teens, I'll use both self-compassion and sort of self-kindness interchangeably. Um, and the young kids, do you know, I don't do it a great deal because I will do it if they're really hard on themselves. Um, and I use compassion focused therapy. But I think also for getting CFT, just who I am as a therapist, I try and bring in that compassion and be compassionate and model compassion. And if I make a mistake in session, which is quite a lot, I'll own it and be like, oh yeah, I can't speak today. Or that's okay. You know, these things happen, like, and try and model that kind of easier talking to oneself. And then with teens, maybe I'll go a bit more direct in actually doing more CFT type skills or even a bit of chair work. And again, chair work's good because you're getting people up and moving, so it's a bit more active. And one thing going back to play therapy, like for ADHD, if they got the H part of it, the hyperactivity, then play therapy is good because it keeps their
Oh
brain
yeah.
active and keeps them moving. And then you can
Mm.
put in ERP in there and act. So in terms of blocks and resistances for compassion, that I don't think I've come across a lot, to be honest. And I'm on about teens, you know, like 16 and under. As you hit 18, 19, you start to maybe get more resistance because they're becoming more adults. They've experienced a lot at this point, and things have set in and cemented a bit more. So there's more resistance. But young kids, I don't, nothing's coming to my mind of a single kid that's resisted it or had any
Yeah.
blocks. There probably has been, but it's not obvious. And teens don't. Their main objection is this doesn't work.
Hmm.
So it's not, well, that is a resistance, but it's not like, I always thought when I started doing this, they'd be like, oh, this is weird. Like, this is
Yeah.
woo woo, compassion's soft. And to be honest, I think that was my beliefs about compassion originally, still thinking, well, others are going to think this. And of
Yeah.
course, others do think that. But from a team point of view, they're not. Yeah, they're not. It's just like, oh, it's not helping me. It's like, okay, but let's not focus on the outcome. Let's just focus on how you're treating yourself.
Yeah.
That's all that
Yeah.
matters. Forget the outcome.
Yeah. And it's like that paper, compassion is not a benzo. So,
Yeah. Yeah.
they're expecting it to be like a benzodiazepine, and
Yeah.
it's not. It's about courage and, treating themselves kindly and getting back into their life, not about reducing the anxiety directly.
Yeah. It's like if you're going to suffer, suffer with a friend in your ear
Yeah. Yeah.
because
Yeah.
that's a
Yeah.
lot better than suffering alone with
Yeah.
a person that's being a douchebag to you. It's
Yeah.
that, you know,
Yeah.
um, yeah. So there's not a lot
Mm.
to say on compassion really or blocks because I think it's much
Do you
more as you
think
get older.
that kicks in?
That
That
don't get
makes
me wrong, with
sense.
certain life
Yeah.
experiences, there obviously will be many kids out there
Yeah.
who have a ton of
Yeah.
blocks to combat. I don't deserve, especially
Yeah.
if there's been abuse and stuff like that.
Trauma, more
Currently
severe
in my
trauma.
private practice, I don't see a lot of abuse
Hmm.
backgrounds. I
Hmm.
did in my
Yeah.
training from where I was training
Yeah.
and stuff. Obviously there are abuse, but not like the physical,
Yeah.
sexual, even emotional.
Yeah.
There a bit, but I see that more in like the 20-year-olds I work with and stuff like that. So equally, it
Yeah.
might be that the kids just aren't opening up or aware yet and sharing that with me. Um,
Yeah. 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 I think
in
that's
my population,
interesting
yeah,
nonetheless. Yeah.
yeah,
And the barriers more generally, then, I mean, you've named some really good ones. So they're often wanting something to work really simply and quickly, and they don't like it when it doesn't. And
yeah.
yeah, what other barriers are you hitting with children, young people?
Probably more so with ACT than compassion. Um,
Hmm.
ACT is it's that yeah they want it to work or even they're much teens are much more I've found with me judgmental of ACT than they are of compassion.
Oh, that's interesting, isn't
Interestingly, this is just what I'm experiencing. I have no research to back this, but
it?
yeah,
Hmm.
ACT they just from the get go they're like that seems a bit pants. Like that's not going to work.
It's a tough
Um,
sell, right? I often
yeah,
think that it is a tough sell, and that's where you've got to hit the bottom enough times to go, okay, accepting in the service of values, and that makes sense. But I think it's a tough sell for adults often. People want an instant pain relief that
Yeah.
works very simply and reliably, and
Yeah, it's like, how is
it's a tough
naming my
sell.
thoughts going to help me? How is that going
Yeah,
to? So that's where actually I will bring in like disclosure examples. Like I
yeah.
was on holiday last week, vacation for my Americans, um, and just a staycation. And isn't that weird? Actually, we call it holiday in the UK, but when we stay in the UK, we call it a staycation, not stoliday.
Mm.
Anyway, uh, and I was really stuck on something. Something was bothering me, and I think I messaged you it, and it kept coming up and coming up, and I was getting really fused. And for about a day and a half, it ruined it for me. And then I was like, "What am I doing? I'm not doing what I preach here." So I had to
Mm.
start, noticing, naming every time it came up,
Yeah.
refocusing back in what I was doing, using my senses if I need. Kept doing that.
Mm.
As I did that, the periods between my brain reminding me got bigger and bigger and bigger. The next
Yeah.
day, it only reminded me a few times. I used the skills again. By the third day, I didn't care anymore. The
Yeah.
thing that was bothering me just was not important,
Yeah.
And so,
Yeah.
how could it go from being like ruining my life to being not important? Just through
Yeah.
that skill and the refocusing in what mattered to
Mm.
me.
Yeah.
And obviously, that's
That's a
come from
great
years of
experience to have.
practice,
Yeah.
but
Mm.
I'll share that if it's
Yeah.
relevant to kind of
Yeah.
and teens especially really resonate of, oh, you're not some teachers are great, but teachers maybe not always do self-disclosure, whereas some
Yeah.
obviously will. But you're not just this teacher teaching them, you're a human being who has flaws, and
Yeah.
and then you're working on those flaws. So those choice moments to disclose, I think, can be quite powerful for some young people.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
I think teens
Yeah.
can
That's
get really
awesome.
interested though and ask you too many questions and then you
Yeah.
have to dial back and be like and
Yeah.
put it back onto them. But
Yeah.
yeah,
Yeah. That's cool. Yeah, and that's a great example, really great example of using skills and practicing what you preach. It's awesome. Um, yeah, it was a question around the parent side of things. Like you've
Mm.
started a parents group, and that's obviously a really good opportunity for parents who are struggling, supporting their kids, going through this to sort of learn principles, how they can be of best help. But is there any broad brush stuff you would say, in terms of how adults can be most helpful with their kids and young people?
Yeah. I'll speak non-evidence based. Well, I'm sure there's evidence for it, but just generally
Mm.
speaking, like I see, I saw it today with a client. Kids just want to be heard. They want to be seen, and when I say seen, their inner world wants to be seen. And quite often there's a lot of loving parents, but maybe they grew up with not a lot of emotional understanding because their parents didn't have it. And then, so they're very loving and attuned and attentive to their kids, but they might not be asking enough questions about, how are you feeling in a minute? How's it going? I can see that bothers you, or and exploring and having those conversations. And teens, okay, a lot of the time might be like, ugh, go away, you know, but it still means something to them. But you're going to get
Yeah,
rejected, and that's something
but you keep
we've got
coming
to,
back is the thing that
yeah,
the teen needs, isn't it? Yeah.
exactly. And with young kids, I think young kids can sometimes be quite quiet, not all, obviously, but I think they just need to be heard. And And I think that's just an easy mistake. And I think parents are way better now than they were once because it's in the I keep forgetting it's in society basically is
The
another word for it.
zeitgeist or whatever's
Zeitgeist.
shifted.
Yeah,
Yeah.
exactly.
Mm.
About emotional intelligence and inner worlds and so parents nowadays generally, but maybe our generation weren't that skilled in that area, and that's not their fault. That was just they were never taught, and it wasn't part of the zeitgeist. But
You're
it's just
coming out of a
something
post-World War II, and
100%. Yeah.
sort of
Yeah.
certain stoic ideas that were needed at that time, and then
Oh, very much so. Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah. So none of this is ever to blame anyone. It's just to improve things. That's the only goal that there should be. Um, Yeah. I fully know I try to be a loving parent. I make mistakes. I'm going to continue to make mistakes in the future, but I'm going to continue to
Oh
try
yeah,
and improve. It's, um, and and then more practically space. So supportive parenting for anxious childhood emotions, which is a research-backed protocol where therapists who are space trained work specifically with parents, usually of kids who are refusing to go to therapy, and it's for anxiety of all kinds and OCD. And I work with parents sometimes doing that, and I've seen some pretty good results doing that. And even when I don't do it step by step, even if I'm working with a kid, I might bring in space principles. So it's increasing support. They have a whole formula for that.
yeah,
And then it's reducing accommodations. And there's a whole step-by-step
yeah.
protocol. And the book for that, which I'll link in the show notes of this episode, is really good. And it's aimed at helping parents
Mm,
step by step. If you don't have the money to work with a therapist or don't want to, that book is quite good.
mm,
And I cover a lot of that in the course, as you mentioned, that I run for parents. But yeah, that my go-to is keep it simple. Just read that book,
yeah,
audiobook. I also did an episode with Ellie Leibovitz, Dr. Ellie
yeah,
Leibovitz, and I'll link to that as well.
yeah. It's so simple, isn't it? It's great,
Yeah,
that concept of space.
yeah,
Yeah, awesome. Well, I think so many useful points there, Stu, and really inspiring me and stuff for adults, to be honest. As I hear you talk, it's reminded me of some really, powerful concepts. So that's awesome. Um, Going to ask a slight twist on your classic ending questions. So, what do you think a young Stu would have wanted and needed from a therapist? If we think about the times when you were really struggling with OCD when you were younger, what would you have needed at that point?
well, this is probably going to reveal why I said some of the stuff I said earlier, which is he just needed to be listened to, like, and given the time to open up. I think he was quite closed, like a flower that hadn't quite flourished yet in
Yeah,
spring. It was a bud.
yeah,
And at times I need that time to for those that can't see, I'm opening my hand slowly. So
very
just
flower-like.
listen. Yeah, yeah. What? What did you
Your
say?
hand's very flower-like.
Oh, I thought you said something else
I'm
then.
no, I'm just pointing. I'm just describing it for the audience that it looks very like a flower.
Yeah, yeah, I've been working on it.
Yeah.
But yeah, just someone to see my inner world.
Mm, yeah,
And that's what
yeah,
we, as humans, we all want, right? We all need to be
yeah.
seen. And sometimes it's scary to be seen, because maybe we've been seen before and it was hurtful, but we need to be seen in a safe way with empathy. And then I think also he needs to be told, just don't believe everything you think. I think that message early on of, okay, so you've been
Mm,
having some intrusive images, some intrusive thoughts. So what? That's scary. Sorry, that's
mm,
going through you. But these are just normal, mate. Like, it
yeah.
happens for millions of people, and it's, sad you're going through it, but you don't need to be worried about them.
Mm,
Just
mm,
pay them no mind the best you can. Focus back in on playing, doing whatever you want to do.
yeah.
If they stick around a bit longer, let me know, and we'll get some therapy.
Mm, excellent. Yeah. Yeah. Such powerful messages, and I'm sure relevant to everyone listening as well.
Mm.
Brilliant. Well, thank you for sharing your expertise and wisdom with us, and really cool to have the opportunity to interview you. And yeah, really enjoyed it.
Yeah, thanks, mate. I appreciate it. You're a good interviewer, and I might never host an episode again. I might just be the guest.
No, no, your
No one
audience
wants
will be
that.
outraged.
Yeah.
They'll,
Yeah.
oh, thousands of trolls. Just get him off, get him off.
Yeah, thanks, Johnny.
Thanks.
Thank you for listening to this week's podcast. And thank you to our Patreons who helped make this episode possible. And if you would like to find out more about Patreon and the rewards and benefits, then there will be a link in the episode description. If you enjoy the OCD Stories podcast and would like to support us, please subscribe and rate the show wherever you listen to the podcast. And thank you to NoCD for supporting our work. If you want to find out more about NoCD, head to go.treatmyocd.com/the OCD Stories or click the link in the episode description. And quick disclaimer, guys, this podcast is not therapy. It is not a replacement for therapy. Please seek treatment from a trained professional. And until we speak, take care.